Welcome back to MACNA 2020 Phoenix Rising. I have the proud honor of introducing the last speaker from MACNA 2020. His name is Richard Ross. Rich is known for the Skeptical Reef Keeping article series, the Skim8 podcast, his groundbreaking work in cephalopod husbandry, his entertaining and informative talks for managing an ambitious 212,000-gallon tank at the Steinhardt Aquarium at the California Academy of Sciences, and most recently for spawning Acropora species in closed systems as part of the Albright Coral Spawning Lab at the California Academy of Sciences. Here to talk to us about how to become a reef master is none other than Richard Ross. Richard, welcome to MACNA 2020 Phoenix Rising.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Thanks for having me, MACNA and MASNA, and hi to everybody sitting at home. I'm kind of excited that we were able to figure out a way to do this conference, even with all that's going on in the world. So my name is Richard Ross, and I'm here to talk to you about how to become a reef master. And if you know anything about me, you know I hate terms like reef master and guru and those kinds of things. So why am I saying this? Well, because Kevin asked me to do a talk that looked that was for people who are 2 years into the hobby and maybe longer, and what would make them be a better reef keeper. What information could we give them that would help them do better by themselves and by their animals? And so I decided to call it How to Become a Reef Master, because that's the complete antithesis of what I actually think in the real world. But in thinking about it, I realized, you know, I have a couple of black belts, but in no way do I consider myself a master in the Korean martial art of Kuk Sool Won. So there's all these different levels of learning. And I think aiming for a high level, whatever you call it, is a good idea for you as a reef keeper. If you want to be a reef keeper long-term and do well, I'm trying now to give you a bunch of foundational stuff that will help you achieve that goal. Now, I'm not going to tell you about, you know, what you should be specifically doing for your tank, but I'm going to give you basically ways to approach getting information and how to navigate the sea of terrible information that's out there and how to make good decisions about your reef tank. So, and I've got a lot of examples. So let's get into it. Okay. My name is Richard Ross. I like cephalopods. I have a wife, and she's an adult figure skater, and I love her. And this is her winning a competition in some European country as King George from Hamilton, which makes me laugh every time I see it. This is my daughter. She rides dragons, which is very exciting and terrifying at the same time as she jumps bigger and bigger dragons. I do have a big reef tank in my living room. This is a current picture of it. It's kind of fun with MACNA. I've been lucky and honored enough to speak at MACNA for a bunch of times, so I actually have pictures of my tank from every August for the last bunch of years, which is kind of fun to look at. I think it's doing really well right now. We're going to talk a little bit more about it later. It's filled in nicely. The top is a SPS and the bottom is NPS. And I think that's very cool. That's how it's evolved over time. I also have a secret home lab, which I'm sitting in. You can see it behind me now. It changes over time, but we'll talk about that. And in this lab, I have studied this cool larger Pacific octopus, striped octopus, this lesser Pacific striped octopus. I was also a senior biologist at the California Academy of Sciences for 10 years, where I ran, among other things, their giant 200,000-gallon reef tank. Nowadays, I'm more into coral spawning with the Albright lab, and also here, back there. That's why that is closed off, because it is cycling for spawning. But coral spawning is pretty cool if you don't know anything about it. That's not what this talk is about, but I'm really into it, and it's really cool, and the world is making incredible advances in it nowadays. And there should be some articles coming out in the next 6 months or so, which should help you coral spawn if that's something you're into. Now, so why become a reef master? Because you want to be like my late friend Bob Fenner, who we all miss. He, I think, epitomizes what a reef master actually is. Not only did he know a bunch of stuff, but he was willing to share his information freely all the time. That was fantastic. But I think the most important thing about Bob as a reef master is that he was happy to tell you when he didn't know something. And I think that's really the mark of a reef master. Stay away from people who tell you they know everything. You don't want to deal with that. So what do you need to do to be a master of reef? Maybe master of reef, what master of reef was a better phrase. But there's so much to assimilate in a reef tank. It's not a simple endeavor by any means. You need structural engineering. Is your tank going to crash through your floor or not? Is your stand going to hold over time? You need to know about filtration, different pets. You need to know electrical. How many circuits do you have? How many amps are you pulling? Do you want to distribute that as your tank grows? You need fish biology, invert biology, some physics for light. You need to know flow dynamics and medical stuff and behavior. You need to be a lab tech. You need to be able to run tests and interpret tests and take that data down so you can see it over time. You need to be an equipment expert, and that field is constantly changing. There's always new equipment. You need to know about plumbing, and you need to make decisions about plumbing, and you need to make them right now because you're gluing stuff together, so that can be intimidating. You need chemistry, and there's so much more. It just goes on and on. And why do you want to assimilate all that stuff? Well, because you want the animals that you have to stay alive. You want to save the money that you can. You don't want to spend money if you don't need to. And most importantly, you want to get the respect of your friends in the reef keeping community who will make you pictures like this because they tell you they love you. Or maybe Raj is my father, which is possible. He's a time traveler. So I was trying to figure out a way to make all of this make sense in a through line for the talk. And the only way I could think of doing that was to make an equation for becoming a reef master. So that's what I did. Here's my equation for becoming a reef master. So now we're done. We can cut, we can stop. Everyone can just read the equation and follow it. No. So what this equation is, I'll tell you briefly what it says, and then we'll go through each variable. Knowledge times understanding times the entirety of the negative knowledge and understanding over your experience times your successful systems over the square root of the tests you've run and the experiments you've run plus the content you've created can equal you to becoming a reef master. So let's go through them one at a time, right? Knowledge. So knowing things is super important, right? It seems like a dumb thing to say, but knowledge and understanding are two different things. Knowledge refers to static, discrete facts, things you can actually know and pull out of a book. While I'll tell you what understanding is in a little bit. So the thing I'll say at the outset is that recipes to reef keeping are not knowledge. When you're first starting out, everybody wants some kind of recipe. This is a recipe for making coral reefs. It's not actually a reef aquarium recipe, but there are those out there now I've seen. And a recipe can help get you going, but it's not gonna give you any knowledge. You're not gonna know anything after the recipe. And the recipe is only gonna work if it works. When you're doing a recipe and something goes wrong, you're in big trouble because you don't actually have the foundational knowledge to understand what's going on. That doesn't mean you shouldn't try recipes at the beginning. They're very, very helpful. Just know they are not a substitute for knowledge. If something goes wrong, and recipes don't work out, right? When you're even IKEA furniture, when you put them together for the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth time, you're going to scream and throw things because you're going to get so frustrated. And those directions are pretty good. And you have every single part you need in the box. You don't even need to go out and get anything. So a reef tank is much more complicated than that. So don't mistake recipes for knowledge. They're just something to be helpful. Where do you get knowledge? Where do you get information? Good place still is books. This is one of my collections of books of reef stuff. And it turns out in this collection of books, there really isn't a good book that I would recommend to people who want reef knowledge. These are more esoteric. The corals of the world and the reef fishes of the world, those will give you information on specific animals, but not on the kind of holistic soup of reef keeping. Good books for that you should check out. My favorites, because I think they're like textbooks, are the Reef Aquariums Volume 1 and 3 by De Bleek and Sprung. Great books, a lot of good information. A little bit of it's dated now, but the underlying message in those books will get you moving in the right direction. Those books changed everything for me. When I got back into the hobby, those books existed. They didn't exist before that. And I went through them like textbooks, like I was in school, and my copies are all highlighted with, you know, relevant sections that are interesting, and they're annotated. So they're very useful. I skipped number 2 because that's more about specific animals. It's a good book too, but clearly they were drinking or taking a break or something when they wrote that one, or just trying to cash in, which is good. Cashing in is good. Also on this shelf are magazines. Magazines can be a good place to get info as well. There's fewer and fewer of magazines all the time, especially print magazines. So those are kind of hard to get to. You can make a safe assumption that the people who write from print magazines and for print books have been vetted in some way. So you might feel comfortable about that information. You might not. We'll talk about that stuff in a minute, about how to be comfortable with information. Articles are very good. There's a trend that you need to watch out for now on some forums where everything is being called an article, where they have members write up basically a long post and call it an article. And that gives it a gravitas that it might not necessarily deserve. So beware of that when you're on the forums. Just because it says it's an article doesn't necessarily mean that you should take it as gospel. So just be careful with that. It may have very good information. There's some of them that are very good, but just watch out, because you think they're vetted, but they may not be. What is this? Blogs are kind of the same way. There's a bunch of them out there right now, and there's actually a ton of them out there right now. So watch out for that. Those are very hard to know if the people writing that stuff are on or they're not. Podcasts, this is some weenie does a podcast with another weenie, if you want to check it out. Podcasts can be good. There's not that many actual podcasts now. There's a lot of video podcasts now. I don't know what I think about that, but podcasts can be good, and they're also nice to have on in the car. But again, you wanna know if you should be listening to these people, and we'll talk about that in a sec. Forums are awesome, right? Or they used to be awesome. Now they're a little crazy. The problem with forums is you have no idea who you're talking to or if they know what they're talking about, and that becomes problematic. And when the forums get huge, you get a billion people all telling you what they think, which might be based on nothing. So navigating the forums can be difficult. This is Humblefish Forum, which is a newer forum that focuses mostly on medication and the reef aquarium. So I think I'm kind of liking the idea of having specific forums for specific interests, rather than trying to cover everything when it becomes unmanageable and you don't know where to go to anymore on a forum with a million choices. So maybe we'll see more of that happening. YouTube videos, influencers, and the like. I really don't know what to think about this genre of entertainment. I think that's really what it really is. I think it's entertainment. I think you can get some information from some of the influencers, but their goal is not to give you information. Their goal is to be influencers and get a lot of likes. So that's fine to watch it and be happy about it and be excited and think it's fun, but they may not be the best place to go for information. They may be. I don't know. I also have a problem with getting information out of videos, especially I'd much rather get a paper or have some screens of the videos that show me the important figures about what they're talking about. You know, if they're talking about a comparison of pHs, I'd like to see that rather than just hear it out loud. BRS does a decent job of that. So you can look at the BRS videos and they do a lot of experimentation. But just know that a lot of the videos out there are for entertainment. They're not really to get you information. Facebook forums, avoid them like the plague. They're just terrible. And the reason they are so terrible is because Facebook is terrible. Facebook is made for you to have quick conversations with people and then move on, and that information is then lost. When you're trying to have an ongoing discussion over time, Facebook threading has gotten worse and worse over the years. So first of all, trying to find an old thread that's got information is impossible. And trying to search for anything is impossible. Plus, Facebook is so anonymous and there's so many people on it that they generally devolve into shouting wars and fanboys versus haters. And I don't see it as useful for getting real information. If you've got a smaller Facebook group and you know a bunch of the people, it's great. It's great for talking to people and asking questions, but for searching for knowledge, I wouldn't be my go-to. Local clubs don't get talked about nearly enough in this day and age. They are a great resource for everything. So I highly recommend that you check out your local club. And if there isn't a local club and you want to be a Reef Master, start one. You will get exposed to so many different things and so many different aspects of the hobby that it does nothing but good for you. I learned so much when I was a founding member of a club and the club grew. Learned so much the whole time. It also gives you a venue to speak. So if you want to be a Reef Master, and we'll get to this again, teaching is a great way to be a Reef Master. Share everything you know. So if you can go give talks at your local clubs, lower pressure, and you know most of those people, I highly recommend it. And then something you're already doing is going to international conferences or even local conferences and talking to people you don't know. So congratulations, you're well on your way with that. You can also check out scientific papers. Now, science isn't the end-all of reef keeping because we don't study it rigorously enough for the science to be really helpful, but there is useful science out there that is applicable. One that has a lot of kind of hands-on science is in a regular journal called Drum and Croker, and it's from Public Aquaria, and they're available online going back 50 years. Here's an article me and Matt Wandell wrote about using melamine foam and auto feeding. So there's a lot of articles like that. So look those up and take a look what you can find. And I don't mean to disparage scientific papers as well. They are very useful, but very, very specific bandwidth for each paper. Experts and gurus, I touched on this before. Should you trust these people because you've seen them on TV? No, especially now that we know what's happened to them after they've been on TV. Seems like they're a lot less trustable. So how do you trust experts, right? And this goes to forums, this goes to magazines, this goes to books. How do you know which ones to trust? You know, so I think the proof is in the pudding on that one. So if you want to know if you should trust somebody who's giving you advice, whatever level of the hobby they are, find a picture of their aquariums and look at them, right? Find a video of their aquariums and look at them. If the aquarium looks healthy and looks like something that you want in your own home, by all means, listen to them. They made that aquarium. They know about it. If it doesn't look like something that you would like, don't do what they do, because clearly they're doing something differently than what you would want. And if the tank looks terrible, don't listen to them at all. And if they refuse to show you a picture of their tank, I would squint a whole lot. It makes it very hard to trust somebody with no other information at all unless they show you what they want about their tanks, you know, what's going on with their tank. It's very bizarre. Authority in the hobby is very strange. I was a quasi authority before I got my job at the academy as a biologist in the aquarium. People, you know, knew who I was, but the day after I got that job, I'm the same idiot I was the day before. Suddenly I had this gravitas with my opinions because I work there. Don't fall into that. Don't go to arguments from authority just because somebody works somewhere. Do a little bit more work than that. You know, find people you trust and listen to them and find reasons to trust them. So how do you know what information to trust? Carl Sagan, and this is all about knowledge. Carl Sagan, in a book, The Demon Haunted World, which is one of the best books ever written, makes a baloney detection kit. It's a way, a set of questions you can ask in situations about claims people are making, whether to give those claims any credence. So I have ripped off Carl Sagan, because that's the kind of guy I am, and made a baloney detection kit. And we'll go through it quickly and then we'll move on to the rest of the equation. The baloney detection kit. Number one, how reliable is the source of the claim? If it's Johnny1234 loves reefs on some reef forum, I don't think that's reliable at all. If it's Randy Holmes Farley in the Randy Holmes Farley chemistry form, I think that's a pretty reliable claim and you can listen to it. So check the source. Have the claims been verified? This is almost never going to happen to you in the hobby. There's very little verification of claims, but I still like to push it because I think we should go this direction. If the claim has been verified, you're all good to go. If it hasn't, it hasn't, you know. So how do you know if it's verified? Have there been any studies? Have there been any experiments that you can look at? Is there any anecdotal evidence that you can look at and see if it's trustworthy? So check the verification of the claims. Does this fit with how reef aquariums are generally thought to work? If the big example I always come up with this one is there was a tincture you could put into fresh water that would allow saltwater fish and some inverts to survive for some amount of time. And that was pimped as an exciting thing because now you could keep these animals in fresh water. That is exactly the opposite of how we think everything in reef aquariums works. So when you see a claim like that, you should squint a whole lot at that claim. Squinting is being skeptical. I don't know if that's right or not. That's the kind of thing you should be thinking when you see a claim that doesn't fit. That claim did not pan out. That's a terrible thing to do. Don't do it. Long-term, mid-term, it's terrible for your animals. Does the claim have an overcomplicated explanation? It gets covered in kind of quasi-science talk and gets very complicated very quickly. You should squint at it because they should be able to tell you the claim very simply, and you should be able to understand it with follow-up questions. If they vomit 10 pages of scientific sounding jargon on you, squint. Are the claims covered in green speak? This is one of the new things that's happening. Everyone wants to say that their product is good for the planet, that it's green, that it's reliable, that it's responsible, that it's sustainable. But you need to find out if they actually mean those things. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. I'm not trying to say that everyone is nefarious in the reefing world, but it's kind of like everyone's nefarious a little bit. There's a lot of nefarious people in the world in general. So it makes sense that it would be in the hobby as well. So just watch out for green speak or weasel words. They should make you squint and you should dig a little deeper. That's really the overarching idea of this baloney kit. Does what they say make you squint? And if it does, dig some more. Does the claim have too many claims, right? Does the product have too many claims? We used to have Mark Weiss products that would fix everything in your reef tank. They would feed your fish, they would feed your corals, they would make everything healthier, they would do the biological filtration, they would stop parasites, they would make your corals color up and grow faster, they would keep your water cleaner, they would allow for better light penetration. That's an insane amount of claims to make for one product. That should make you squint. Then finally, what do people you trust think of the claim? This is going to be a theme that'll come up over and over again as you go into reef keeping. You need to develop a posse of people you trust that you can go to and go, what do you think about this? Now that posse is going to change as time goes on and as you meet more people and things like that. You know, if I've got a question about chemistry, I'm going to ask Randy Holmes Farley or Boomer or Craig Bingman or Matt Wandell, right? If I've got a question about light, I'm going to reach out to Sanjay. You know, but you have local people who know these things too. Those people that you know nationally may or may not be accessible to you. They usually are. But, you know, get your posse together and then you have a group to talk to. Local clubs are really good for this. You have a group of people to talk to and bounce ideas off. And your friends in your local club will go, that's a crazy idea. You should do it anyway. Or that's a crazy idea. Don't do it because lots of stuff will die. We don't need to run that experiment again. It's been run 1,000,000 times and everything dies. Don't try to raise your baby cephalopods on brine shrimp. So that is your baloney detection kit. The next part, right? So understanding is an active process. It describes the ability to analyze and place facts in context of an active or bigger picture, right? So you could know things, but not understand them in a certain way. And I think that's just, how do you practically use that knowledge is, I think, what understanding is. My good example of this, I like that I said it's a good example. I haven't given this talk before, so maybe it's a terrible example. You'll let me know in the comments, I'm sure. Is pH. So we all kind of understand pH, and there's a couple of things that we know about it. We know that pH goes up when CO2 in the air or in the water goes down, right? And we know that pH goes down when there's more CO2 around, right? And I'll just tangent for a second. This often comes up in systems that don't have outside air for their skimmer. They have a depressed pH. Lots of people like to add CO2 absorbing resin in their in their intake to their skimmer. And that ends up being a reef recipe that people want to try. That has severe limitations and it takes a bunch of work to make it go. So don't just follow, if you have low pH, don't just do that because somebody said it. Really find out there's a way you can get outside air to pump in. That's really the one you want to do. But that's not what I'm here to talk about. About 5-6 years ago, I came home one day and my tank was chalk white. This is the day after, where you can see all the SPS are dead and all the stuff below on the NPS seemed to survive. And what happened was there was a novel Kalkwasser event in my tank. Something strange happened, which I have now put things in place so it can't happen again. And it overdosed my tank with caulk, and it was really bad. When I got home, I couldn't see into the tank very far, and the fish were all rolling around on the bottom. They were just being tossed in the current. It was very, very distressing. I ran around to see what was going on. It was very clear it was a caulk event. The pH of the tank was 10.7. 10.7 is bad for all animals. So I thought, I need to get this. What can I do? And this is where the understanding comes in. So I know everything about pH. I know if I add CO2, somehow that will depress the pH, right? How the hell do you do that? Well, I thought there's CO2 in tonic water or carbonated water. I could just take salt water and put it on the soda stream. So I tried that really quick because we had a soda stream at the time, and it did bring down the pH a little bit. It was a very fleeting impact, and I was going to need gallons and gallons and gallons of water. I was thinking about carbonating salt water at the time. Because right, again, we're looking at the understanding. If you add 20 gallons of, or let's say 50 gallons of carbonated fresh water to your 400-gallon saltwater tank, you're going to change the salinity of the tank, and that's bad too. So you have to understand the system in general. I finally decided, wait a second, I have a calcium reactor that doses CO2 with its own controller and pH monitor. So why don't I just fix that? Why don't I use that to dose CO2 into the system itself rather than dosing into just the reactor? And what I did was I realized I didn't want to be dosing CO2 into the sump because that's not where the animals are. I want where the animals are to have the lower pH as quickly as possible. Plus, I don't know what the lag time for things are in the sump. You know, how long is it going to take the pH to drop in my tank if I'm doing 180 gallons of sump water, if I'm lowering the pH there? And am I going to miss the mark and overshoot and bring my pH down to 6, which would be a double whammy of badness, right? So what I did was I ran along our O line from the CO2 cylinder all the way up to the tank, changed which pH probe it was reading because I had a pH probe in the tank, and voila, I could dose CO2 straight to the tank. Did it slowly at first and kept a real eye on it for a couple hours and tweaked it because as soon as it stopped dosing, it would come back up very quickly, which makes a lot of sense. There's still a lot of high pH water elsewhere in the system. But very quickly, I was able to get the pH in the tank down to about 8 to 9, 8.59. And I tell you, man, the fish, I tell you, person, the fish popped right up off the ground and started swimming actively. So I credit that to an understanding of the system and the situation rather than knowledge. The last thing, another thing I'll say about, what is this? What are we talking about? Understanding is just do the work. Don't look for instant fixes. Instant fixes are great, but they don't really teach you anything, and they often aren't an instant fix. Algae is one that's talked about all the time. I really think just manually, just do the work, remove the algae, put some kind of filter on the tank, scrape the algae and remove as much as you can. Stop waiting for something else to magically do that work for you. The longer you wait, the worse it gets. A little bit of work over time is easy. I hear about vermitid snails a lot. A lot of people do not like them and are looking for magic fixes. This comes in waves. Every 3 or 4 years, people freak out about these snails. And you hear a lot about that. They're impossible to get rid of. They are not impossible to get rid of. It just takes some little bit of sustained effort. Here is a video, let's see if that works, of me using a dental tool to reach into the tube of the snail and break it open. And in fact, I'm able to break it open all the way down to where the snail is, and you'll see the body of the snail. boom, I'm able to pull the body of the snail out, just throw that in the water, let the fishes eat it. They love it. You can also use other tools. This is a needle nose plier. If you can reach the snail, you can pop them and just crush them, and then your fish come around and have a delicious meal. There's a bunch of tools you could use for that. This here is an alligator tool, an alligator pliers, which has got a tiny mouth. It's a little bit difficult to use because it doesn't have a lot of leverage, but there are all kinds of needle nose pliers you could use that have different shapes. I've got some angled pairs that I couldn't find today that can actually help you get under a rock to be able to crush a vermitid snail. So this is, again, understanding. You're thinking your way through the problem. What do I need to do it? Now, the little dental picks are fantastic. What you could do with these, I use these for everything with coral spawning. So I have a ton of dental tools around. Got to clean those substrates all the time. Just do it for 10. If you've got 1 million vermitids, just do it for 10 minutes a week for 3 or 4 weeks. You'll be surprisingly, and do the easy ones. Don't think about trying to get rid of them all. Get rid of the ones you can. And very quickly, you will reduce their numbers a lot. And then you'll be able to make decisions about how to get the ones that are hard to get. So yeah, make some effort. It's that gives you a much better understanding. I've used lasers on vermitid snails, and it seems to work. I haven't done the test or the experiment well enough to be able to tell you it absolutely works, but maybe you'll come up with some new idea because you're trying rather than waiting for a miracle cure. And then you can help everyone in the hobby. And that's what I want. I want you to come up with something easier than what I do. And then tell me about it so I can do it. And then I can just sit on the couch more and watch my tank rather than have to do stuff. All right, back to the equation. The next thing we're looking at is the anti-knowledge and understanding. You need to know what you don't know, right? So there's this thing called the Dunning-Kruger effect. Here's a nice kind of jerky graph about confidence versus wisdom. The first peak is called the peak of Mount Stupid. And that's when people get a little bit of knowledge and then think they know a whole lot more than they actually know, and they're completely unaware of what they don't know. And that's dangerous. Always kind of try to be humble and be aware that there's a lot you don't know. There is so much I don't know in this hobby, and I will be happy to tell you what I don't know. And I will be happy to tell you who might know and who you should talk to besides me. There are a few things in this hobby I know a crap ton about, and I would be very happy being an expert in those areas. A lot of other places I will walk way back and qualify all my statements all the way around and tell you what I think I know. So beware of people who know things and make sure that you're not one of them. A much better, if you can stop that peak of Mount Stupid, the graph kind of looks like this, and it's just a delicious rise into wisdom. And that's what we're looking for. Learn along the way. Be aware that there are things you don't know and that you don't know what those things are, and be careful about them. Another thing you need to watch out for with anti-knowledge is the plethora of devices that give you exact numbers. Exact numbers are scary because they make your brain think that they're righter. You know, something that goes down to 2 decimal places seems really compelling to our little monkey brains, but it may not be. So there's a lot of checkers that do that. I'm not picking on them. I'm not picking on these guys. But you need to know, excuse me, you need to know the limitations of what those devices are, right? In fact, it's interesting. In technology, there's something called a technology trigger, which actually increases Dunning-Kruger effect. And you see it all the time if you follow some of the controller forums. People get a controller before they know what they're doing with it, and they think it's going to make their tank work. What they don't understand is that the controller only does what you tell it to do. The controller is not magic. And if you don't know how to tell it what to do or what to tell it to do, it's not going to give you a good time. You're going to be very sad, and you're going to go up. You're going to get this peak of inflated expectations where you're going to say this controller is crap. And then you're going to go, everything is crap, as you get more depressed because things are dying and not going the way you want them to. And then you go, oh, on the slope of enlightenment, you think, maybe it was me. Maybe it was me not knowing that I needed to put another code in there that would make it turn off at a certain time. And then you go, oh, this isn't so bad, and you start using it. We tend to overestimate technology when we first use it, and then we tend to underestimate it later on. It's very interesting. Nowhere is this more clear than in testing. Testing, I hate testing. I hate aquarium testing. Everything's on fire. It's not fine. It's just terrible, right? Because the test results are so squidgy, but they seem like they're not squidgy, right? They seem like I've gotten this test and it has told me this number. What do you need to know? You need to know that not all drops are the same size. So if you're doing a titration test, the size of the drop may or may not matter to you in your result. A lot of the times we're just looking for ballpark figures. Titration drops don't matter so much. If you are pretending that somehow you are testing alkalinity to the second decimal place in DKH, your drop size is going to be really important. You really can't. Don't even do that. Don't do that. Meniscus, you need to know where to look through your test tube to know where the actual level of the water is. Water likes to crawl up the side of glass. So if you're looking for the wrong angle, you're going to think you have more water than you actually do. Color changing titrations, or when you're comparing colors to a table, can be very difficult because color is different to different people. Color is different to you in different lighting and different conditions. For instance, I'm told that these 4 blocks have things written on them. I can't see anything written on them, so I hope nothing is dirty. If you have poor color perception, you're going to have a hard time. But I'm telling you, if you have different lights, if you have sunlight to get your result, and then you're using the fluorescent lights in your kitchen later that night, you're going to get a different answer. Shake for 1 minute. Does anybody really shake it for a minute? How hard do you shake it for a minute? What do you do for that minute? How are you shaking it for the minute? Do you do it the same way every time? I've got a test for my DR890 for nitrate that says I should shake vigorously for 1 minute. I don't know what vigorously means. All I know is that you do it the same way every time, so at least your test results become more consistent. Something else to look out for is confirmation bias. It is strong with us, right? When I do a water test and the test comes back in the realm of what I think it should be, I do not retest. When a test comes back and it looks wacky to me, I do retest because I am a friggin' monkey like everybody else here. We're all monkeys, right? We're looking to support the things we want to have happen. I'm not saying you should, that doing that doesn't make sense. By knowledge and understanding, you can look around and you can see what's going on in your tank. And you know that if you're getting a pH of 10 on your test, that's probably wrong because everything's not dead. So there are times when it makes sense, but I guarantee you the amount of times people retest a result that they want versus a time that they test a result that they think they don't want is very, very different. Also know the plus and minus. What is the range of acceptable difference of error for your test kit? That changes from device to device to device and test to test to test, but you should check it out. If you're doing an alkalinity test and it's got a margin of error of plus or minus 1 DKH, that means if you get a reading of 8, that your test could be 7 or it could be 9, right? So watch out for that. It's something you need to understand. For testing, go for trends. This is a pH trend on the top from a Apex controller. Trends give you information over time. You can do your own trends too. Test at the same time every day for several weeks and write it down. Like Adam Savage says, the difference between messing around and science is writing it down. Write it down. If you don't write it down, then you're going to be going, I wonder what I seem to remember the pH was higher last week, but you can't trust that because your memory is completely fallible. Moving along to another variable in the equation, experience. Get as much experience as you can, right? Work at a tropical fish store. Don't be afraid to quit when you're done working at a tropical fish store. Don't get stuck there forever if it's not the thing for you. But you will be exposed to many, many things in a tropical fish store that will help your knowledge and your understanding. Volunteer at a public aquarium. These people are volunteering at a specific part of a public aquarium. They're volunteering in the water quality lab because they wanted to know more about how water quality happens. So you can do that. You can volunteer there, or you can volunteer for husbandry, which we should have a different word, a non-gender specific word for husbandry, people's tree. I don't know what to call it. We should come up with one of those because that's hip and it's actually not a bad thing to do. But you know, the volunteers who volunteered for me got really, really good exposure to the 10 or 12 exhibits that I was running. And my goal was to get them on the days they were there to do everything that needed to happen on those exhibits and more. So you really do get a lot of good experience. Work at a public aquarium, again, don't be afraid to quit. If it's not for you, it's a great job that will give you a lot of experience. So if you can do it, do it. Build a fish room, build a silly secret home lab, make it changeable, right? You can't get the same experience by doing the same thing over and over again. You need different experience. So this is the secret home lab when I was doing a lot of octopus and cephalopod work. Looks like I was also breeding a lot of clownfish at the time. The lab changes all the time. This is the new version of the lab, which you can also see behind me because it's set up for coral spawning now. I could bring a bunch of that stuff back in here anytime I wanted to. So, you know, give yourself your own exposure. Now, that doesn't mean that you need to have a lab. You could just set up a different system. And in fact, the next part of the equation is your experience times the successful systems that you've run. Here's my reef tank. I think it's pretty successful. Some other people seem to think that too. Here's my reef tank in blue. More people seem to think it's successful when it's blue. I don't understand that. This is my anemone tank that has got volume, so you probably hear things sloshing around. But this is an experimental tank. It's actually right over here behind me. You can see it over my shoulder. And that tank's doing really well, and I'm playing with keeping anemones. I've been doing that for about 2 years, right? And these anemones I've had for a couple of years, and they're doing well. These are giganteas. They're my favorite anemone in the wild. I would never think it would be a good idea to drop an anemone like this into your display tank. I think that's probably a bad idea. I got to move along a little bit. And here's a bunch of other tanks. My lab is based on this lab. I built this lab at the academy first, and then took what I learned for that to make the lab behind me even better. Testing and experimenting. You want to run a test. A test is basically you're doing it because you have an expectation of who's going to win, of what the answer is going to be, and you want to see if it's true or not. When ICP testing came out, Chris Maupin and I tested. We sent them a standardized and certified test, and we got results back. There are links to that on my website, which is at the end of this, that you can read. And you can make your own conclusions about the data we had. But we were testing it. We weren't doing any experiment. When I was raising baby clownfish, I did some tests to see if clownfish were viable feeders for marine predators. And for some of them it was, and for some of them, I just love this. I love that I've got a real reason to put this in the talk now. The Dr. Seuss fish eating Nemo. It worked for some animals. It doesn't work for some other animals. So you'll have to test that yourself if you want to use them. And again, testing, if you've got more stuff in your house, you can test it, right? You can also just set up a small tank. You don't need to set up 1 million tanks, right? If you want to experiment with flow, you can set up a 40-gallon tank and experiment with flow. You can actually set it up with fresh water and experiment with flow. If you want to do softies because you've never done softies, just set up a 20-gallon tank. It doesn't have to be connected to everything. This doesn't have to be complicated. Experiments are actually trying to see what the best method is. And I'm going to go through this quick. Because of COVID, I had to bring all the coral spawn from the academy to the house and raise it, and I had to figure out ways to keep them alive. I ended up using a wave maker to keep these buckets gently moving in a wave. I like what I'm doing with my body right now. That keeps the larvae and the fertilized embryos from clumping, and it keeps them from sticking to the sides. It worked really, really well. That's like the 10th iteration of trying to figure out what to do, right? Here is who cares about that? This is another thing which which has an in and an out, and I experimented with this a lot. I could lower the water level when I was flood feeding the baby corals, and the water would all stay in this sweater box. When it was time to flush it out, I would raise the level in the tank so that the water could pass through one side of the sweater box and exit on the other side. And I used a wave to push the water out. This was really effective, and it has, like all good experiments should, put me on the path for a whole bunch of different ideas for flow look to the space, hopefully in the future, for information on that. The last thing about this talk and about this function, about this equation, is content. Make content, right? Make your own content. In posts on forums, explaining things to people is the best way to make sure you understand and to teach you new things. Write articles and have them vetted by an editor who will tell you if you're out of your mind or not. Have somebody read it before you post it, and they'll tell you if you're out of your mind or not, right? Make videos if you've got something to make a video about. Share the information you have in any way you can. It will make you better and will make everybody else better. I want to know, what you discover, what works for you that I don't know anything about. Please make my life easier by becoming a Reef Master. I hope this talk was helpful to you and interesting. If you have any other questions, shoot them out. Find me on social media or wherever. I'd be happy to answer them. Or you can go to my website, therichross.com, which should have links to everything that I have talked about in this talk. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you for being part of MACNA 2020 Phoenix Rising. And hopefully I'll see you all in person next year. Peace.
Thank you very much, Richard. If you have any additional questions for Rich, please go to macna.org/questions, and we will get those to him here in the next couple of minutes. Please stay here, and we will go right over to our next question and answer session. We'll be answering the questions from today. Thank you very much, Rich, for joining us here today at MACNA 2020 Phoenix Rising.